Hi friends, this is Eric, your host talking on Spanish people, and Concord 298 has been very patient and persistent about getting me to answer this comment, so I thought while I'm sitting here with some time to kill the tournament, I would do so. He says the following: Hello, host Eric, I want to ask a few questions about the nature of INFPs to empathize with even the parties who are the wrongdoers and their adherence to rehabilitative justice in opposition to retributive justice. Number one, why exactly is it that INFPs are like this? Why don't other types do this? Do ISFPs do anything similar? And the answer to those questions is INFPs are like this because they prioritize an interested equation. They say, I understand this as a matter of personal interest. And as what?
Sorry.
That's not what I want. Okay, so as a matter of personal interest, I respect everybody's own personal interested evaluation of it. I don't like things that constrain us to specific rules because the particular circumstances are always going to be the most compelling factor for me. If I'm an FI down with NE, especially as a tool function, NE is going to be like, well, here are some other possible ways in which their feelings could be deeply tied in with this, and that's going to make them seem well, they're going to be much more quote unquote empathetic. And Opioid here says they do it because they value the individual even with flaws. And that's another way to put it as well, is they're individual focused. They think the unique individual has a particularist arrangement of natures and qualities that make them uniquely valuable in and of themselves, which is in general a good position to have, I think. However, let's go on to the next part of this thing. It says here that do ISFPs do anything similar? I would say no, generally, because ISFPs don't work in a metaphysical world of ideas very much. It's about how it directly links to their feelings as an actor in the world and the things that they value, people they value. They're much more clear and decisive about their own feelings than our INFPs because the SE is a doing function that says, let's stop thinking and let's act upon our judgment. FI is a judging function that doesn't necessarily need to ideate. It can just be uh, kind of like animal thing where mothers naturally love their babies, kind of thing. Plus, they refer to their own victim narrative on they self-refer their own victim narrative onto the offender, and thus redeeming the offender means redeeming themselves. Well, that's true. They understand INFPs understand themselves to be subject to critique, and of course, they are rather subject to critique because the things that they are valuing and arguing don't generalize particularly well, and as a consequence, they're saying I think what Opal is getting at there is when they're saying don't critique that dictator, they're saying don't critique me. Yeah, ISFP will be less metaphysical than INFP and thus less willing to take a holistic karmic principle. I agree with that. Okay, so let's go on to question 2 here. What exactly is wrong with this opinion? In a previous video, you mentioned that retributive justice is important because the person who's harmed should get compensation. Well, that would be restorative justice. Compensation is restorative. Retributive justice is the the person who's wronged gets a sense of getting even metaphysically. Restorative justice provides uh, actual compensation. While I agree with this, I don't exactly agree with the emotional anger and hatred shown towards the person who is doing wrong or harm. Because isn't it that everybody always does what best they think is, and in cases when they don't know, don't have time to think, or their thinking process is being hindered by some physical emotional thing, they just respond according to their physical nature, cognitive nature? Um, is there anything wrong with this? What exactly is the thing we are taking pleasure from regarding their retribution? From where this emotional anger is coming, do people exist who just can't be made to learn the right way? If yes, then how? Well, okay, so there's a general notion that there's something bad about hatred or wanting vengeance. And certainly, to the extent that or responding to a comment, I'll share it on the screen so you guys can see it. Uh, It's uh, it's true that in an entirely just world, human beings wouldn't feel the need to take pleasure in the harming of other human beings simply because that other human being is guilty of some sort of wrongdoing. However, the key thing here is to note that a wrongdoing, in its most literal sense, is a transgression. So the wrongdoer has not done something wrong that's not in dispute, say, like been rude or uh, they're not doing something wrong that's in dispute, being rude or maybe doing drugs or having casual sex or something. Those things aren't really moral issues because they don't transgress against anybody. If, however, somebody harms another party, directly, criminally violates them, then that person is going to feel strongly as though the equilibrium has been unbalanced in the universe and they want some sort of retribution, want to get even. And it's maybe not our most noble quality, but it's the thing that prevents people from running roughshod over us. Anger is a useful thing to have. It's not always well applied. It's not always the right thing, but and it's if nobody gets outraged by outrageous behavior, it just normalizes it. And to demand retribution is a form of outrage. Uh, and where does it come from? It comes from a valuing that's implicit in existence as life. If you are a living agent, there's implicit value into the universe. You can't be a living agent without having at least seeking and fulfillment. Wanting food, for example, and then feeling satiated when you get it. Those sort of things are the basis upon which a life form is distinct from a non-living object. It's that it has valuings. So naturally, that which opposes our inherently self-focused valuings, like gets in the way of us getting food, is going to be bothersome. But there are higher values that humans uphold and aspire to. Values like equity, values like fairness, and values like non-transgression, which isn't really so much a value as it is a principle. But uh, these things represent humanity's evolution. They're desirable states to attain. We don't want to be in a world where we aren't outraged by outrageous behavior. So let's continue on. Do people exist who just can't be made to learn the right way? Well, I do believe that psychopaths and sociopaths exist, and it's not a matter of making them learn or not making them learn. It's a matter of are they ethically healthy beings? That is to say, do they experience an existential trauma that goes along with uh, wickedness, intentional infliction of suffering, uh, willful intention of suffering, not necessarily foreseeable, not just foreseeable, but actively willed for that purpose. That's evil by anybody's definition. Willfully creating suffering for just that purpose, just to see that person suffer, that's evil. It's only not evil to willfully create suffering when it's responsive, because then it's not suffering, it's justice. Oh, justice may require some suffering on somebody's part. Uh, okay, so how much do you agree with the following statement? Everybody should have universal human right to think, and if they don't want harm to be done by society onto them, then they should always, before taking any physical action, consider whether the physical action will do any unjustified harm to anyone. The exception to this is when they can't think, don't have sufficient knowledge, and thus want to explore and discover or make a mistaken judgment. And this is a question that seems related to the above to me. Uh, well, the key thing there is justification, unjustified harm. And it's not just physical actions that create unjustified harm, emotional actions create unjustified harms too. It's just not transgressive in a way that legally ought to be attended to. The key word is unjustified because that determines whether something is a wicked harm or a just harm. And the justification I'm presenting is transgression is the primary engine of it. Retributive justice, if there's no means of enforcing a principled prohibition against transgression, then there's no meaningful prohibition against transgression. So, in other words, we can't both acknowledge that it's a great wrong and concurrently state that no pursuit of equity ought to be taken. All right, so now let's look at this thing. I have a few more questions. I know that you want to run for president. I'm not sure how busy you are. Oh, yeah, he wanted to know when I was going to make this video. All these things are very good questions, and they have to do with the challenge that any politician or anybody who's common in our society, and kind of pundit, anybody who's informed.
Anybody's here?
Hi, anybody who's informed in general, they they are going to approach their ideation through certain frameworks. People who prioritize particularism, like INFPs, are going to express that framework. People who prioritize principalism, like NTPs typically, are going to usually argue under that framework. People who prioritize utilitarianism, like SFJs, well, not so much SFJs, maybe like ESFJ or I guess NFPs, they're going to typically express things through that. Or maybe not NFPs, maybe like, your TE users and stuff. Regardless, there really are only three kinds of frameworks in the world. There's lots of variations of each one, but one of them is principalist that says we should know what we're going to do initially based on some principled exclusion that constrains us. So, okay, then the other one is universal utilitarianism, which says we should anticipate the likely outcomes and base our decision on those anticipated outcomes. And the third one is particularism, which says we can't come up with any kind of rules. We have to adjudicate each individual circumstance with all the interested shareholders or the community members involved to decide what's just in this circumstance given all the particulars. So any given framework is going to be some expression of one of those three frameworks. Either you predict and judge, you um, constrain with rules, or you are arbitrary. INFPs tend to be arbitrary. I don't think it's a good thing for anything that's any kind of public policy. It's fine for their own lives, but people typically apply the same framework to all sorts of different things that I ain't sort of thought about. So yeah, any thoughts on the? Oh, how would you define what is just? Surely what is just to one is not just to another. I don't think you can call causing harm evil unless justified. As said, justification is always usually subjective. Well, but see, I'm not presenting a subjective justification. I'm telling you what the justification is. It's the bright line called transgression. Now, it's not an absolute limiting principle because we can think of examples where no reasonable person would say uh, that person ought to be ought never be subjected to transgression, no matter how many nuclear bombs they have, for example. Uh, so it's not an absolute limiting principle. It's true, but it's by far, by miles and miles and miles, a vastly superior limiting principle to any other available. So it's the most preferable alternative. So it's the one we should use, and it's absolutely not subjective. It's yeah, people who present a any kind of a, a normative framework to determine what justice is are using an objective medium in language. They're saying, I'm defining this is this, giving you this circumstance, and this is one we should use. It's a set of arguments. I'm saying one of those sets of arguments in different normative frameworks that people use is clearly superior to the other ones for public policy. For public policy. Now, the thing is, in people's a personal ethics is different than a public ethics. So I might feel obligated to engage in some altruism. For example, give a homeless guy $1 or some cigarettes or something like that. But I don't feel as though I'm morally obligated to do that on a universal level. I might feel personally as though I'm obligated in this moment to do that because of things related to me. Okay? That as a public policy level, though, I don't think there's any such obligation of positive action. And if anybody tries to argue that there is such a public obligation, the reason I don't think it's the case is because they can't sustain those arguments. They just simply don't withstand any scrutiny. Do public ethics reflect personal ethics? Well, I mean, I would say that public ethics is a personal ethics but only the parts of it that you think apply to everybody or ought to apply to everybody. So I think it ought to apply to everybody that as a default, except in extreme situations, we don't transgress and we don't legitimize transgression. We don't normalize transgression. So I certainly like drug laws, they all need to be abolished because every time a person is incarcerated for a drug crime, that person who's incarcerated is the victim of the real crime, namely uh, kidnapping, false imprisonment, uh, unlawful unlawful restraint, because there's no legitimate legal reason why they can be convicted for that. For example, if it were true that possession of drugs is an action worthy of criminal prosecution, then the police could never collect the evidence without themselves being guilty of the crime. So, my public ethics is my private ethics minus altruism, because nobody's obligated to engage in altruism. And I'm not, as a general rule, obligated to engage in it, but I am more altruistic by far than what I consider my technical obligation. Okay, so I'm going to wait and see what guest says here and reply, and after that I'm going to end this video and read that and call it a video because I don't want to get too long. And this is for Concord 298, who has waited very patiently. I'm sorry for making you wait like that, Concord. Right. Well, the ones who think the death penalty is just are wrong, and the ones who don't are correct. Just because two cultures disagree doesn't mean that neither of them is right. One of them almost certainly is right, and the other one almost certainly is wrong. And that can be determined through argumentation analysis. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese. And have a nice day.